Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome, my dear faves, to the third part of What If Orihime Ended Up in the World of Full Metal Alchemist. Credit goes to Blood Pokemon 101 for this fantastic fanfic. Link is in the description for those who prefer to read or want to contact the author. Chapter 9. How It All Began. As they sat through the quiet train ride towards East City, Edward, Alphonse, and Orihime decided to play a game of cards to pass the time. Orihime was gazing in agony at the cards she received. Such terrible cards. Orihime? Quote. She turned her gaze towards Al. It's your turn to discard, he informed her. Oh, right, she perked up, trading one card for another. Even though they were playing a simple game of poker, the ginger-haired girl's mind has been all over the place. What was Tatsuki doing? I hope she wasn't stressing out. But knowing her, her best friend was having a full-on panic attack. Just imagine, after a few months of reuniting with her closest friend after she went through the worst experience of her life, that friend is ripped away from her again without any warning or knowledge of her disappearance. Not to mention, Ichigo's probably suffering once again because of her. Chad, Uryu, and her decided to keep all the hollow activates away from Ichigo as to not worry him about the danger. She sighed. Ever since Ichigo lost his Soul Reaper powers, he's been feeling uneasy. He tries to hide it, saying that he finally has the normal life he always wanted. A life without powers or without spiritual awareness, but she knows it's not true. He's unhappy. He feels helpless. He feels agitated. Every time she looks into his brown eyes, it felt like he lost a little bit himself. They weren't as bright and full of determination and passion as they used to be. They were dimmer. Much, much duller. However, Orihime knew one day Ichigo would regain his Soul Reaper powers. And until that day comes, she'll become stronger to support him in battle. She vowed to get stronger. She won't rely on him to protect her. She'll protect herself. Never again would he die because of her. Never again. Orihime? Quote. Orihime. Quote. The ginger-haired girl jumped, startled when someone practically screamed her name. WH what? Exclamation mark. She stammered, trying to keep her raging heart from exploding out of her chest. Gray eyes glanced over to see Alphonse looking at her in concern and Edward crossing his arms impatiently. Damn, we had to call your name like 5 times, Ed stated, furrowing his brows. I almost felt like I had to hit you with a book to get your attention. Orihime let out a nervous laugh. Sorry about that. What were you thinking about, Orihime? Al asked curiously. Gray eyes blinked owlishly at him. Her lips broke out into pensive smile. There are some friends I left back home that I'm worried about. That's all. We can ask the colonel to escort you back home, if you're that homesick, Alphonse suggested. The auburn-haired girl shook her head, rejecting the idea. No, that's okay. I'm not planning on returning just yet. Why not? Edward inquired, his own curiosity showing through. Why are you traveling in the first place? Quote. No real reason, Orihime answered simply, yet her voice was full of longing. I just wanted, to start over. To start over from zero, she stated softly, raising her open palm hand in the air thoughtfully. She knew she was confusing the boys even more, but her thoughts were all over the place. She really wondered what Ichigo and the others were doing now. Ichigo was returning home after another day off school. His scowl prominent on his face, one hand stuffed in his pocket of his gray trousers while the other one was holding his bag slung over his shoulder. He was angry. Downright furious. It's been over a month since she suddenly disappeared. A month since she was suddenly taken away, and yet again, he was powerless to protect her. The orange-haired teen was angry that his friends tried to hide the fact of Orihime's disappearance. When he first noticed her absences from school, he thought maybe she was staying because she was sick. But when the days started turning into weeks, his anxiety grew. And when a month had passed and still no sign of Orihime, he began to panic, fearing the worst. It felt just like incident with her being kidnapped by Aizen. However, now, he was absolutely powerless. Even if he could reach her somehow, someway, how could he protect her? Ichigo's conversation with Uryu proved just how truly useless he currently was, and he was just deluding himself to believing he was happy without his powers when he absolutely loathed being powerless. He wasn't there when Chad and Uryu were fighting hollows along with Orihime before her unexplainable disappearance, but he did get some information from the two men on how it happened. Flashback. It was just a typical average day. Ever since the defeat of Aizen, the days seemed more peaceful than it ever was in months. Sure, there were still hollow attacks every now and then, but those were nothing compared to the Arankars. Orihime perked up when she felt the presence of a hollow. She glanced over to Chad and Uryu to see if they noticed it, which they did. All the same, she tried to avoid making eye contact with Ichigo. She didn't want to alert of the danger and make him feel inept. Raising her hand in the air, she made a subtle excuse to go to the bathroom. Without hesitation, the teacher allowed her to go. Saying her appreciation, the ginger-haired girl leapt out of her desk and raced off, but not towards the bathroom like she said, but towards the presence of the hollow threat. When Orihime arrived at its location, she was mildly surprised to find there were more than one hollow. There were at least 6 or 7 of them. However, they all had low spirit energy, so they weren't that much of a threat. With the help of Uryu and Chad, the auburn-haired girl managed to fight off most of the hollows. However, one of the hollows snuck up on her and struck her with its tail, hitting her head and sending her body flying. The last thing that happened was the world around distorting and someone screaming her name. Then, nothing. End of flashback. Ichigo punched a nearby wall, letting out a slew of curses. If only he still had his Soul Reaper powers, he would have been there to protect Orihime. Letting out an angry breath, he dug into his pocket and pulled out a black card. It was the execution card he got from a man named Ginjo. He tightened his fist around it. With a look of fierce determination in his brown eyes, Ichigo vowed to regain the powers he once lost. I'm coming, Orihime. I'm coming. No, Edward. You can't do that. Quote. Do what? The blonde boy asked, confused, watching as the girl snatched the card from on top of his suitcase, which they were using to play on. You can only use the Ace of Hearts to counteract the King of Diamonds or Queen of Spades, Orihime instructed, pouting at him. In response, Edward made a small groan of frustration. This damn game is too confusing. Why are there so many rules? Quote, "The rules do tend to be pretty contradictory at times," Alphonse added in thoughtfully. Golden eyes glared at the ginger-haired girl. "Are you sure this is a real game where you're from?" he asked suspiciously. Orihime nodded enthusiastically. "Yep. Sure is." Then she paused, her face faltering. 10 minutes ago, she mumbled, but it was loud enough for both boys to hear. "What?" Exclamation mark. Ed shrieked out, face contorted in both dumbfounded and annoyed. "Why would you make this game up, Orihime?" Al questioned out of curiosity. He was less freaked out than his brother. Gray eyes stared at the blonde alchemist sitting across from her. Her lips formed into a small angry pout before turning her head away. "I'm tired of losing. You can't make up some half-assed game because of that," Edward exclaimed, waving his arms around frantically. Seeing Ed's facial expression caused Orihime let out small fits of giggles. His face turned a light shade of red in embarrassment. Don't laugh at me." He childishly turned away, crossing his arms, making the ginger-haired girl laugh even louder. Chapter 10. Alchemy. Here they are. The trio finally made it to East City. Orihime watched tentatively as Edward flashed their tickets at the receptionist. "So, we are finally here," Edward groaned. He didn't sound very happy, which made Orihime frown. "You don't sound very excited to be here," Orihime said. Ed gave her an exasperated look. "Of course not. Once again, I'll have to listen to Colonel Bastard's sarcastic lectures of my failures." This caused the girl to raise a quizzical eyebrow. "What brother means is, he has to report to Colonel Mustang every once in a while," Alphonse elaborated. "He doesn't like the colonel much." The auburn-haired girl nodded in understanding. There were some people Ichigo didn't get along with as well. Orihime followed quietly behind Edward and Alphonse, ignoring the whispers going on around her. It was broad daylight, so adults were out working and doing their usual daily activities. Although, some would stop, point at them, and mutter something to their friends or families. The ginger-haired girl didn't really mind much. Though, Ed was a different story. He would occasionally shoot angry daggers at the passerbyers whilst Al just shook his head solemnly at his brother's temperament. The trio finally arrived at a large, white building covered in a green banner with a dragon-like design on. The huge structure was surrounded by a large fence. Orihime stared in awe and amazement at the building. "Well, here we are. Eastern Command Center," Edward announced, pushing the fence open and walking inside. Ed walked up to the lady at the receptionist desk. As he chatted with her, Orihime took a look around her surroundings. Everyone, men and women, were dressed in a blue uniform. The girl quickly concluded that must be the standard-issue military uniform for this country. She wondered why Edward didn't wear it. He is part of the military, right? Unless, the uniform is optional. They were all too busy scurrying around jiggling paperwork and the like to pay her any mind. "Let's go, Al," Orihime. Ed's voice snapped the auburn-haired girl out of her thoughts. "Right. Coming." She followed after the Elric brothers as they led her through the twists and turns of the hallways. They finally came upon a large white door, and Orihime instantly knew this was Edward's superior's office. She swallowed down the anxiety that began to build up. "Just relax," she inwardly told herself, trying to calm down her nerves. I've been through this before with the Soul Reapers. I just need to keep calm and handle any situation they throw at me with a cool-headed composure." Without warning, Edward threw the door open, startling the already nervous girl. The first thing her gray eyes took notice of was a man with short black hair scribbling on a piece of paper, grumbling to himself while a lady with blonde hair pinned back was sending him firm glares all the while standing behind him. They both wore those blue uniforms. Hearing the door slam open, the blonde woman looked up, a small smile gracing her lips as she took notice of the two boys. "Welcome back, boys." Her brown eyes finally took notice of the auburn-haired girl standing behind them, her hands fidgeting at the hem of her gray blazer. "Who is this?" "My name is Orihime Inoue." "Pleased to meet you," Orihime spoke up, louder than intended to, causing her to quickly cover her mouth. The amused smirk Edward sent her made her face turn a light shade of pink. The two boys took their seat on the couch and Orihime followed suit, sitting beside Ed. The black-haired man finally took a moment out of his paperwork to glance at the three. "Full Metal, you know you're not allowed to bring unauthorized personnel in here," he chastised the blonde boy, sending him an annoyed glare. "Even if they happen to be your girlfriend," he added, a small smirk appearing on his face. Ed's face turned beet red in response to that suggestive statement. "She's not my girlfriend, you ass. She's the healer we were sent to Gria to retrieve," he shouted angrily. Mustang paused, eyes widening slightly, taking a good look at the girl sitting next to the Full Metal Alchemist. In all honesty, he never expected someone so young to be an expert healer. He expected someone older and wiser, not a teenage girl. He clasped his hands together, placing his elbows on the desk so they shadowed the bottom half of his face. "So, you are the incredible healer rumors started going on about?" he asked, scrutinizing the girl. Orihime let out a nervous smile, scratching the side of her cheek. "I guess so." Mustang rose an inquisitive brow. The girl seemed to be pretty modest, unlike Full Metal, who likes to brag about his accomplishments. "Orihime's powers are incredible, Colonel," Alphonse chirped. "She has an amazing ability to heal any wound. She healed Brother's injuries twice." "Al." Edward cut in, feeling somewhat humiliated. He was making it sound like he was beaten so badly, Orihime had to step in to save his life. Once again, the colonel was staring at the ginger-haired girl contemplatively, causing the aforementioned girl to shrink under his intense gaze. Mustang knows that Alphonse rarely lies, and if what he's saying is true, then rumors were not kidding about the girl's healing prowess. Just imagine someone like that working under him. He tried to suppress a smirk from forming, a perverted smirk. He wondered what the girl would look like under a nurse's uniform. Having a personal hot nurse would be incredible, not to mention he'll be closer to getting that promotion to Central. Edward scowled at the look the colonel's facial features were expression. He knew his superior was thinking of something dirty. "Whatever perverted thoughts you have, get it out of your head right now." Quote. Mustang frowned at the blonde boy. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, feigning ignorance. "And besides, I thought you said Orihime wasn't your girlfriend?" Ed glared angrily at the dark-haired man. "She's not. But she deserves better than a perverted bastard like you." Quote. The colonel raised a playfully challenging eyebrow. "Oh? And who would be a better partner for her?" The Full Metal Alchemist clamped his mouth shut, unable to come up with a reliable answer. He hasn't known the girl long enough to know what kind of guys she likes. When the question of what guy Orihime would like to have as a boyfriend, thoughts and memories of Ichigo popped up in the girl's head. She bit her lip back to keep herself from sobbing. She must remain strong. She'll find a way back home somehow. The sound of a gun cocking ceased the men's arguing as the blonde woman pointing her pistol at the back of the dark-haired man's head, making him sweat nervously. Oh, there's one more thing we forgot to mention, Colonel. Orihime was attacked by the homunculi, Alphonse informed the two officers, a grave expression decorating his voice. This news seemed to shock the two officers as they both stared at the girl intensely. Are you sure it was the homunculi, Alphonse? The blonde lady asked, voice full of alarm. Yep, definitely, Edward answered for his brother, a serious expression on his face. It was lust and gluttony. We managed to fight and drive them off before they could make off with Orihime. Orihime began to fidget under everyone's fierce gaze as they were all staring at her. Were these homunculi people really that dangerous? Mustang was the first to speak up, his voice laced with an overall serious and grave overtone. Orihime, what did the homunculi say to you? Quote. The ginger-haired girl thought for a minute. At first, she was considering not telling. She didn't want to bring any more trouble than she already was. But, seeing as they all seemed to know a lot more about these homunculi, it was better to come clean and confess. Maybe they had better equipment to deal with situations like this. After all, they are the natives of this world, not her. They didn't say much, Orihime answered, her nervousness showing through. They only said that they wanted me as a sacrifice. There were shocked gasps that sounded across the room. A sacrifice, huh? She heard Mustang mumbled. There is an alchemy exam coming up soon, the colonel announced. It's a test where alchemists take to become state alchemist. If you pass, you'll be working under me providing medical care for our unit. And in return, you'd be provided protection from the homunculi and other threats. He gave a tiny smirk. Of course that means you would become the dog of the military just like Full Metal. Orihime already had her answer. She didn't need to think twice about. Clenching her hands together, she stared at the colonel, determinedly. I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to have to pass, she said, sternly and with such conviction. But Orihime. Alphonse interjected frantically. If you become a state alchemist, you'll be provided protection from the homunculi. I know that. But I also know that I would only be restricted to helping people in this country, and I don't want that. I'm not an arrogant person, so I won't say that I want to help every single person in the entire world. Although, I also won't be satisfied with only helping a handful of people. I want to help an ocean's worth of people. Quote. Everyone stared at her wide-eyed at her selfless and strong declaration. The silence and the intensity of their flabbergasted gazes were making the auburn-haired girl's face turn pink in embarrassment. Edward was the first to break the silence, turning away, scoffing. Isn't that a little too optimistic? Quote. Orihime only gleefully laughed in response. If that's your answer, fine, Mustang cut in. Although, I would still want to provide you with a couple of bodyguards. Can't have someone with your powers go to waste, especially if the homunculi are after you. The aforementioned girl bit her lip. Then who will be guarding me? Quote. The colonel nodded his head towards the Elric brothers. Getting the message, Edward swiftly climbed off the couch, his face set in a deep, disapproving scowl. No way, Colonel Bastard. As soon as we came to East City, we were done babysitting. Me and Al still need to search for the Philosopher's Stone. We can't be babysitting anymore. Quote. Brother. Al chastised. However, Ed only ignored him. Don't think about it as babysitting, Fullmetal Mustang replied with a small smirk. Think about it as having an extra companion on your journey. And besides, with all the trouble you get into, you'll need someone to treat your broken and beat-up body before you end up getting buried 10 feet under. The blonde alchemist knew what his superior was insinuating. On one hand, having a personal nurse wouldn't be so bad. He wouldn't have to stop by the hospital every time he gets seriously hurt. But on the other hand, he didn't want another person tagging along, getting in the way of their personal mission to restore their bodies to their original state. Take Orihime with you, Fullmetal. That's an order, Mustang announced, leaving no room for argument. Fine, Ed agreed reluctantly. The colonel smirked, knowing he won. And I also don't know why you don't want to have such a gorgeous girl traveling with you, he said with a playful smirk. You must be blind or something. Alphonse had to hold his older brother back from thrashing the dark-haired man. As the men were making such a commotion, Orihime, remembering something, unzipped her bag, pulling out a tied-up white cloth from it. She stood up and walked over the blonde-haired woman. What is it? The lady asked her. Orihime held her hand out for the woman to take the bag. Here. I made macarons. Take it, miss, she trailed off, not knowing the lady's name. The blonde lady gave her a soft smile. It's Riza. Riza Hawkeye. And thanks, she took the white bag from the girl's outstretched hand. The ginger-haired girl smiled in return, not before being yanked away by a fuming Ed. Let's get the hell out of here. I can't stand being in the Colonel Bastard's presence anymore. The blonde alchemist growled out. The girl stayed silent as she let him drag her away, waving goodbye to Mustang and Hawkeye, with Alphonse following quietly after them. Later that day, Orihime found herself in the hotel Edward and Alphonse used while they stayed in East City. Orihime sat awkwardly on a brown leather couch as she watched Alphonse failed attempts at comforting a sulking Edward. You know, you don't have to be my bodyguards, if you don't want to, the ginger-haired girl piped in. This caught both boys' attentions. I mean, I don't want to cause any more trouble, she said, shrinking away from their gazes. It's no trouble at all, Orihime, Alphonse reassured her. Edward, on the other hand, remained silent, a scowl still set on his face. It also doesn't make me happy, she muttered under breath, a downcast expression on her face. What was that? Edward asked, his hard gaze staring straight at her. He wanted to know if he heard her right. Orihime offered a lopsided smile. Nothing. She looked around the room. So, what now? What do you guys do? You still haven't explained to us what your powers are, Orihime, Ed said, looking at her sternly. Gray eyes widened in realization. Oh, right, she paused for a second. But can you explain to me what alchemy is? Both brothers glanced at each other, as if having a silent argument. It'll help explain my powers, she added in. The blonde alchemist sighed. Fine. Alchemy is science. Alphonse stepped in to educate Orihime on the subject. The principle of alchemy is to understand, deconstruct, and reconstruct matter. There are 3 steps to alchemy. The first step is comprehension. Orihime watched as Alphonse began drawing on the floor with a piece of chalk. This means you need a deep understanding of the substance and the chemical and molecular makeup of that structure. Next is decomposing. Breaking down the structure into something more malleable, so it's easier to reshape its form. After he finished drawing, he put the chalk away. To the auburn-haired girl, it looked like a circle with a square inside it and a diamond inside the square. And finally, there's reconstructing the substance. Just basically shaping it into a new form. He placed his hands on the drawing, and the ginger-haired girl watched in fascination as the familiar spark of alchemic light began to flash before revealing a small wooden horse in the center of the circle. "Wow! That's amazing!" Orihime yelled out excitedly, clapping her hands in admiration. Alphonse rubbed the back of his head, embarrassed. "It's nothing. What Al drew is called a transmutation circle," Edward Said, cutting into the conversation. "It what alchemists draw to perform transmutations. There are some more advanced transmutation circles for different and stronger transmutations. This one," he explained, pointing at the chalk-drawn circle, "is one of the more basic transmutation circles." Even though Orihime was a straight A student for the most part, what she failed most at was science, barely making it with a B. And by what she could deduce by the Elric brothers' explanation of alchemy, it requires extensive knowledge of science, in particular, chemistry and biology. However, alchemy does have its own laws and limitations, Ed continued, grabbing the girl's attention as she eagerly listened to their lecture. "The most important law in alchemy is the law of equivalent exchange." She seemed to perk up, remembering Edward mentioning this in Gria. Ed took note of the look of recognition on her facial expression. The law of equivalent exchange specifically states that to obtain something of equal value must be lost. Meaning, you can't create something out of nothing. For example, you could only transmute water with something that has attributes to water. And you could only transmute 100 grams of metal with something that equals the weight amount of metal used. Get it? Quote. Orihime tried to process all the information given to her. It was all so complicated. Science was complicated. But she got the simplicity of it. It sounded similar to the laws of thermodynamics and other set of laws she learned in her science classes, but the former seemed to be most prominent. The ginger-haired girl nodded dumbly, her gray eyes staring in awe at the two boys. They were so smart. Well? The impatience underlining Edward's voice snapped her out of her musings. She blinked in confusion. Well, what? Quote. Don't play dumb. Ed almost yelled out, his temper getting the best of him. We showed you our alchemy, now show us yours. It's the law of equivalent exchange. Auburn eyebrows scrunched up in puzzlement. The blonde alchemist's scowl deepened, clearly showing his irritation. Realization flashed across her gray eyes. Oh, yeah? She smiled. Ed just let out a nettled huff. Orihime unclipped her hair clips from the collar of her blazer and placed them on the table. Why did you place your hairpins on the table, Orihime? Alphonse asked. She smiled at him. You'll see? The boys stared at the pins in confusion before their eyes widened with bewilderment when it flashed a bright orange color before bursting apart in a small explosion of energy. Once the flash of light settled down, it revealed the 6 fairies they saw during their fight with lust and gluttony. Alphonse stared at them in odd fascination whilst Edward gave a look of eager learning. You called Orihime? Shuno asked. The ginger-haired nodded. Edward and Alphonse would like for me to explain my powers for them. She scratched the side of her head, sheepishly. You could probably tell them better than I could. Shuno nodded in understanding. Sure. Quote. Orihime perked up as if remembering something. Although, I would appreciate it if you left out the part about soul reapers, hollows, and other things out of the explanation. Just keep it about us and our powers as best as you could. Please? Quote. The blonde spirit stared at her master for a few moments before her face broke into a smile. If that is what you wish, Orihime. The aforementioned girl clapped her hands together in appreciation. Thanks. Quote. The Elric brothers watched Orihime's conversation with the little pixies eagerly. The blonde one turned to face them. As you know, we are Orihime's powers, she started to lecture them. So? Her power is to manifest 6 fairies? Ed asked incredulously. But I thought she had healing abilities, Al added in with his own question. Shuno flew up so she was eye level with the brothers. Well, in a sense, yes. Seeing the perplexed looks she was getting, the blonde fairy started to elaborate further. We are the power that resides inside her soul. So each one of us is an extension of her soul, therefore, her power. The brothers' eyes widened, whether in shock or alarm, Orihime couldn't tell. Wait! Edward practically screeched out, slamming his hands on the table in baffled astonishment. Orihime was able to split her soul into 6 individual beings? Exclamation mark. Then why isn't she dead? Exclamation mark. Once the soul leaves the body, it's lost. Quote. He was really trying to his best to put all of this together. As far as any alchemical studies and knowledge goes, the soul is the most vital part of the human body. Once the soul leaves the body, that means the body was no longer functional, it's dead. There were no cases of the soul actually leaving the body, and the body still being alive and functional. Shuno made a hand gesture, telling him to calm down, he's talking too fast for her to comprehend what he was saying. We are not her soul. We are only a part of it. Okay, I can kind of understand it, Alphonse spoke. But where does Orihime's power come from? How did she acquire this power? My brother and I have never heard such a thing before in all our lives. It's really a lot to take in. The blonde pixie smiled and nodded in understanding. It's understandable. Orihime couldn't comprehend it herself when she first summoned us. In fact, she was so shocked that she tried to capture us and take us to show and tell. Shuno snickered at the memory. Hey! Orihime pouted. Shuno chuckled louder at her master's pouting face before resuming her lecture. Souls are very powerful energy sources. In fact, very few humans are able to draw power from their souls. To be able to manifest their powers, the strength of the person's soul is very crucial. It could be the difference between an average person, having hyper-spiritual awareness, or uncovering your inherent ability. The Elric brothers listened to her explanation with extreme interest. So? Does everyone have the same powers? Edward asked. He wanted to get as much information. All this could be useful in restoring his brother's body back. He needed as much knowledge he could get a hold of to achieve that goal. No, Shuno said, simply. Just like all humans are different, all powers are different. It depends on what kind of person you are. Although, there are a few who share similar fundamental abilities that start to diverge once the person starts to understand and grasp their own power. But what about the law of equivalent exchange? Alphonse pressed. Surely something has to be taken to attain such abilities. Shuno paused, seeming slightly confused. She glanced back at Orihime and the girl returned her gaze with an encouraging smile. The blonde female fairy sighed. As much as she appreciated the sentiment, that wasn't what she was looking for. Equivalent exchange? There was no equivalent exchange. But Orihime had told her to be as truthful about her powers as possible without revealing too much, and that includes twisting the facts a bit. The more she uses us in our powers, the more exhausted Orihime becomes. Shuno spoke, finally answering Al's question. After all, we are using her soul as a power source. The answer wasn't a total lie. Actually, it was more truthful than she thought it would be. Orihime did faint the first time using her powers. And, over time, she's got so strong, she doesn't tire easily from overuse. The boys were absorbing all the information with rapt enthusiasm. This new type of alchemy was so fascinating. Now they had sudden urge to travel to Orihime's home country to find more alchemists like her. Maybe they'll be able to learn to operate this new type of alchemy for themselves. Hey, Orihime! Edward called, grabbing her attention. Gray eyes glanced up at golden ones. Where is Japan located? After seeing her tilt her head in puzzlement, Ed elaborated. We want to go there, he declared. The ginger-haired girl's eyes widened in alarm and she started to sweat nervously. She fidgeted with the hem of her gray skirt. How was she supposed to tell them Japan doesn't exist in their world? To tell them she came from a completely different universe than theirs? And that also means to tell them she's been lying to them all this time? Of course, she felt poorly about being a fibber. But for the sake of her Soul Reaper friends, for the sake of Ichigo and all her friends at school, she can't tell the truth. She just can't. Luckily, she was saved from the humiliation and embarrassment, when Tsubaki swooped in and kicked Edward in the side of his head. The latter let out a small grunt of pain and annoyance. Tsubaki. Orihime scolded the fiery spirit, although, she was mentally thanking him for his intervention. Tsubaki glared at Edward. Listen, kid. You don't need to understand how we operate. All you need to know that we are part of that woman's powers. Got it, Pipsqueak? Quote. Pipsqueak? Exclamation mark. Ed growled out angrily. You know, for someone so tiny, you sure are bossy, Al commented with an animated sweat drop. Well, that's enough explanation, Orihime announced happily. Oh, before I forget, that's Tsubaki, she informed, telling the Ed and Al the names of her 6 spirits. This is Shuno. Her name is Ayame. The bulky guy is Bygone. The one next to him is Hinagaku. And last, this girl's name is Lily. She finished introducing the 6 pixies that make up her power, the Shun Shun Rika. Tsubaki Tsked. Let's go back. He turned to glare at Orihime. Next time, woman, don't call us for some damn exposition. Before Edward could question where they were heading to, there was a bright flash of light. The fairies began to disappear and in their place revealed Orihime's floral hair clips. The ginger-haired picked them up off the table and placed them at their usual place on her blazer's collar. Ed opened his mouth to say something. There were still so many questions he wanted answered. Like where did she find such alchemically charged hair accessories? "Who's ready for dinner?" Orihime blurted out. At the mention of food, the blonde alchemist's stomach growled. She giggled at his red face. She went into the kitchen to start preparing their evening meal. He couldn't believe how late it's gotten. With the sky this dark, he couldn't doing any research on the Philosopher's Stone. He guessed that it was going to have to wait until tomorrow. The aroma of fruits and pastries wafted through the air and the sizzling of pots sounded through. Right now, Ed was thinking two things. First, to quench his hunger, and second, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to have his own private chef and healer traveling with him. The next day, early in the morning in fact, Orihime was woken up by Ed. He didn't really say much. Only muttering something about going to the library. And since they were bodyguarding her, she was obligated to come along. So now, the ginger-haired girl found herself at the East City Library. "What are we doing at the library?" she asked. "To find clues on the Philosopher's Stone," Edward replied. Orihime raised a questionable eyebrow. "The stone is said to be a legend, a myth, but we could always find bits of information about it in books. If we connect the dots, we may find the stone's location," Alphonse elaborated. Orihime grinned and nodded in understanding. She watched silently as Edward pulled out a book and began reading. It amazed her at how focused he was. Nothing else matters, except the task at hand. Almost like Ichigo, she thought fondly. She shook those thoughts away. It'll only make her sad and more homesick. "Orihime?" Quote. "Yes?" Gray eyes glanced up at the suit of armor. "Want to help me look?" Quote. "Sure. But I'm not really that smart, Alphonse," she said slowly. "Don't worry. You could just help me search through the books," Al said. If he had a human face, she could tell he'd be smiling. It's been hours and Edward was encased in a giant pile of books. Right now, he was engrossed in his 21st one. His ears twitched at the sound muttering and the clanking of metal. He has been hearing whispers for quite a while now, but opted to ignore it in favor of concentrating on finding clues about the Philosopher's Stone. Setting the book down, his curiosity getting the best of him, Ed went to investigate the ruckus. When he turned the corner, his jaw almost dropped at the number of guys piled inside a corner of a section. Ed's sweat dropped. There's never been this many people inside the library before. He could make out some of the words the guys were spurring out. "Hey! Why is the hot chick with you? She'll be better off with me. I know how to treat her right." Quote. "I'll take you on, Tin Man. She'll see I'm a better man." Quote. The blonde alchemist leaned in to get a closer look to see what the commotion was about. Trapped inside a corner, he could make out the outlines of his younger brother hiding an uncomfortable Orihime behind him, shielding her from the pack of dogs that call themselves men. His irritation growing at the men's stupidity, he pushed past the crowd until he finally made it to Al and Orihime, catching the two's attentions. "What's going on?" Edward whispered harshly. Before Alphonse could answer, one of the boys groaned, annoyed. "Now, Shorty's here's too?" Quote. Another one snickered. "She's way out of his league." One laughed out loud. "Yeah, he's too short for a hot chick like her." As they were all laughing, none of them realized the throbbing, popping veins on Edward's red face. In a split second, Ed lunged at the men. "Shorty? Can a shorty do this? What else do you want to call me? A half pint? Bean sprout? Midget? I'm still growing, you idiots." He all but furiously roared out, wrathfully tossing each guy in some corner of the library, knocking over shelves and tables and chairs to tumble over, banging loudly against the carpet floor. Unfortunately, Edward's vengeful display caused the three of them to get kicked out of the library. Alphonse sighed as they were walking down the steps of the library. "You couldn't just control your temper, brother?" he accused, giving Ed an exasperated eye glance. In response, the elder Elric looked appalled. "How is this my fault? They were the idiots who called me short," he argued. "No, it's my fault," Orihime said, feeling guilty for having caused that incident. Both brothers stared at her. "Now, look at what you did," Al chastised, bonking Ed on the head for upsetting the auburn-haired girl. Edward flinched. "Ow. What the hell, Al?" he yelled, tenderly rubbing the back of his head his younger brother's metal fist hit. His golden eyes glanced at the girl's guilt-ridden, gray ones. Feeling slightly ashamed, he turned away, crossing his arms. "Don't blame yourself, Orihime. That stupid look doesn't suit you." But she began to protest. It's fine," Ed cut her off, rubbing the side of his head. He began descending down the stairs. "And besides, I figured out our next step. So it wasn't a total loss." "Really, brother?" Al questioned, as he and Orihime caught up to him. "Yeah. Apparently, there's been a priest in Lior who does miracles by producing a bright flash of red light. Do you think it could be?" Alphonse trailed off. The blonde alchemist shook his head. "I don't know, but it's all they have to go on at this point." He looked up at the sky. Orihime could make out the raw determination shining through his golden orbs. "Come on, let's go buy our tickets to the next train to Lior." Chapter 11. Connections comes in all forms. "Ugh. I hate desserts," Edward moaned out, tiredly, slumping against the sandy terrain. He collapsed fully onto the ground, his suitcase falling carelessly beside him. "There's nothing but sand. If there was some grass, I could turn it into bread. I'm starving." Quote. Orihime could fully understand the boy's worn-out complaints. It was so hot. She had to take off her blazer and roll up the sleeves of her button-down, white shirt to try to keep herself cool. The sweat was making her hair stick to her face. She blinked her gray eyes when she noticed they were short one person. The clanking of metal footsteps was unheard. "Edward, where's Alphonse?" Orihime asked, panting out, her own tiredness showing. "Huh?" He glanced at her confused, and realized his brother was missing. "Oh, crap." He jumped in alarm, searching frantically for the giant suit of armor. "Al! Where are you?" "Al!" Quote. "Down here." A familiar voice rang out. Ed let out a startled yell when he felt something grab his ankle. "I sunk again?" A small annoyed growl burst from the blonde boy's lips. Reason number 2 on why I hate the dessert. It took half an hour for both teens to fully dig up the 7 feet tall suit of armor. Orihime was crouched down onto the floor, trying to catch her breath. She was so worn out and thirsty. She pulled out a bottle of water from her pink backpack, and began gulping down its contents, vigorously. "Hey!" Quote. Gray eyes glanced up to see Edward glaring down at her, angrily. "Why didn't you tell me you had water, Orihime?" he accused, pointing a demanding finger at her. The ginger-haired girl stared up in confusion. Alphonse sighed. "She did tell you, brother." remember? Quote. Huh? Ed's face scrunched up, puzzlingly. He obviously didn't recall her giving him some of her water. Orihime gave you a spare bottle an hour ago, Al explained, exasperatedly. You were so thirsty, you finished it in mere seconds. The blonde alchemist's facial expression lit up in realization as he gave a sheepish laugh. Yeah. Sorry. Totally forgot. He suddenly blinked his golden eyes when a ball of white rice wrapped in seaweed entered his vision. He glanced over to see Orihime smiling sweetly at him. Here. This is for you, she simply said. That's all the incentive he needed though, as he took the ball of rice out of her hands and munched on it hungrily. Al shook his head at his brother's antics. You are so predictable, Ed. Fortunately, it wasn't long before the trio reached the city of Lior. Edward's hungry appetite led them to a nearby food stand. He immediately took his seat and began ordering a steak and a glass of orange juice off the menu, Alphonse and Orihime taking their own seats on either side of them. Aren't you going to eat, Orihime? Alphonse asked. You must be hungry, right? Quote. She seemed unsure if she could. After all, she doesn't have any money to spend. Just eat something, Ed commented, offhandedly. I'm paying anyway. The ginger-haired girl nodded, accepting his words. Her gray eyes scanned through the small pub's menu. Her face scrunched, showing her difficult of picking one thing out of the numerous choices presented to her. She tilted her head up, staring at the bright blue sky as if deep in thought. Edward and Alphonse watched her curiously, wondering what's going on in that head of hers. Soon her face broke out into a brilliant smile, and the Elric brothers sworn they heard a light bulb go off in her head. The next words that left her mouth caused them to turn pale. What she was ordering shouldn't be something described as food. Not only did she seem like she was giving the cook culinary advice, but there were just some things that should not even go together unless she plans on deliberately destroy her stomach. Even the cook seemed appalled by her outlandish choices of food combinations. Edward paled even more, thinking about all of Orihime's meals he's been consuming for the past week. Just thinking about it almost made him belched. What the hell have I been eating? Exclamation mark. He thought, feeling both flabbergasted and nauseated. The man could only nod dumbly at Orihime's order as he went to fixing it up along with Ed's. The man turned on the radio as he handed Edward and Orihime their orders. The Elric brothers stared in mild disgust at the ginger-haired girl's meal. It looked like rice topped off with some yellowish-white sauce and steak dressed in purple marinade sauce. Ed pointed a shaking finger at her food. Are you trying to kill yourself? Orihime pouted at his accusation. Why do people find her food combinations so weird? If they tried it, they'll realize how tasty it is. Instead of answering, the auburn-haired girl picked up her spoon, scooped up some rice and popped it in her mouth. She hummed in delight. This was delicious. Unsure, the blonde alchemist glanced at his brother, who only shrugged his shoulders, not knowing what to say. The elder Elric sighed and went back to his own meal. All the while they were eating, the radio was blasting some sermon of a priest preaching some religious nonsense, at least to Edward's ears. He wasn't one for religion. He glanced over to Orihime to see if she was. Although, the girl was too engrossed with her food to pay it no mind. Ed took a sip of his orange juice. So? What are you guys? Like street performers or something? The bartender asked, innocently. This promptly caused the blonde boy to do a spit take. "Hell no, Pops. Do we look like clowns to you?" he said, annoyed. "Well, with the guy in the suit of armor and the girl with the weird taste buds, what else am I supposed to expect?" he questioned, pointing at his two companions. Edward growled lowly under his breath, and climbed off the high chair. "Al, Orihime, let's get out of here." Alphonse stood up from his chair as well. Unfortunately, his head hit the ceiling and the resultant impact caused the radio to fall over and smash into pieces. "Hey," the man said, devastated. "It was just an innocent question. I didn't mean anything by it." Ed waved his hand in a small apologetic manner. "Sorry. Accident. We'll fix it." The man looked him, incredulous. "How so?" "It's smashed to hell." The blonde gave a small smirk. "Just watch and learn, Gramps." Alphonse proceeded to draw a transmutation circle, and set the pieces of the broken radio on top of his finished work. "Okay. Here it goes." With a flash of alchemic light, the radio appeared good as new. All the bystanders, who were there to watch, gasped in awe. "Science is so awesome." Orihime chirped, loudly. Ed gave a smug smirk. "See? How's that? Incredible. It's a miracle. You've been blessed by the sun god just like Father Cornello." Quote. The blonde alchemist gave disappointed and incredulous look. "Blessed by who now?" Quote. Alphonse chuckled. "It's not a miracle. It's alchemy." "Oh. So you three are alchemists?" Edward crossed his arms, his ego returning tenfold. "Then maybe you've heard of us. We're the Elric brothers," he declared, proudly. Soon murmurs rung throughout the crowd as the name, Elric brothers, seemed to dawn on the citizens' faces. Not much later, both Orihime and Alphonse were pulled away and bombarded with various questions, like, "So, you the famous alchemist, Edward Elric? The hero of the people, is this your girlfriend?" etc. No. It's not me." Al protested, causing the small crowd to pause. Then they slowly turned around to face Edward, as if in total disbelief that he could be the full Metal Alchemist. "What?" one man said, slowly, his voice filled with incredulity. "You mean, it's the little guy?" Hearing himself being called little, Edward's temper immediately flared. "Who's little?" Exclamation mark. "Come here and say that to my face. I dare you." The citizens scrambled away, terrified of Ed's demonic outburst. Orihime placed her hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him down. He seemed to work as he settled down to mild annoyance. "So? Who's this guy on the radio?" he inquired, looking at the man whilst pointing at the aforementioned radio. "That's Father Cornello," one of the men answered, trying to overcome his slight fright. For a short guy, he had such a short temper to go with it. After hearing the townsfolk's tale about how Cornello saved this town with his miracles, Ed and Al became skeptical. Orihime listened on with mild curiosity. She really did not have much of an opinion on this miracle maker. The Elric brothers wanted to see this Cornello guy's miracles for themselves. They eventually got the memo that the priest was supposed to perform another miracle in about an hour. Orihime gazed at the tall, bald-headed, old man dressed in black priest garb. He was standing on top of an outdoor altar with hundreds of people watching his work, including herself and Edward and Alphonse. A pink flower petal fell onto his hands. He closed his palm over it, and a flash of red light emerged, transforming the simple petal into a solid rose sash. Gray eyes widened in awe and amazement. So cool. So? What do you think, Al? Edward asked. He had to stand on top of his suitcase to get a better look. There's nothing to think, brother, Alphonse replied. That's alchemy. No doubt about it. But somehow he's bypassing the law of equivalent exchange. He should only be able to turn that into an object of equal mass. And he's turning organic matter into inorganic matter. He shouldn't be able to do that. What do you think, Orihime? Edward asked the female of their small group. Her grays glowed with glee. I don't know, but science is so awesome. Quote. Ed and Al both gave her exaggerated stares. Glad to see you're so easily impressed, the blonde alchemist deadpanned, sarcastically, causing the ginger-haired girl to let out a sheepish laugh. Edward decided to sneak inside the church, followed by Alphonse and Orihime. There they were met with the back of a light-skinned woman with long black hair wearing a white dress. She was kneeling in front of statue, which Orihime believed to be this religion's god, in a praying position. So? This is the sun god, Leto, huh? Edward spoke, catching the woman off guard. The woman glanced over at the three of them, her purple eyes shining with curiosity as she stood up. Welcome. Are you interested in Letoism? She certainly was polite. Nope, can't say I am. Not really the religious type, Ed said, nonchalantly. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. To believe in God is to have hope, she said, smiling. If we believe in the Divine One, then all things are possible. If you believed, then surely He'll bless you and make you grow taller. Quote. What's that supposed to mean? Exclamation mark. Ed growled out. Al had to hold him back from hitting the dark-haired lady. The blonde took in a restrained breath, trying to keep his temper at bay. He plopped down at a nearby bench, legs crossed over. What about bringing the dead back to life? Do you believe that's possible? He questioned, eyeing the woman with such incredulity. Yes, the woman breathed out, a proud smile gracing her face. Edward let out a disappointed sigh, as if finding this lady's faith in this priest or this religion ridiculous. His gloved hand went inside the pocket of his leather pants, and pulled out a small, black, slightly worn-out notebook. Orihime tilted her head in confusion, wondering why he pulled it out in the first. Her eyes then widened in wonder and bewilderment as he started listing off formulas. She glanced over at the dark-haired woman to find that she was just as confused as she was, if not more. After he finished, he closed the book. That list represents the complete chemical makeup of an average human adult. His golden eyes narrowed, glaring at the ground. Even so, there has never been any success in creating a human life. Scientists have spent countless amount of money and research theories. He glanced up at the woman with suppressed displeasure and annoyance. What we can't do with modern science, you think you can do with prayer. Let thy voice to God, and the prayers of the faithful shall be answered. The woman preached, earnestly. Edward let out an amused snort filled with mockery, as he smugly folded his arm behind his back. Did you mention all those ingredients could be brought in a market with a kid's pocket change? Turns out that humans are pretty cheap. As this science versus religion debate was going on between Edward and this religious nut, Orihime thought back to what was said. Was that really all the components that made up the human body? She was both awed and amazed that Ed managed to figure out the makeup of a human to the very last minuscule detail. His intelligence absolutely amazed her. He wasn't at Urahara's level, but still, he was a genius, way smarter than her. Maybe even on par with Uryu, who's the smartest person in their age group. She had to wonder what kind of school did he go to. Probably something advanced. Then her mind drifted back to their argument over the creation of human life. In a way, Soul Reapers have figured out how to create life in the form of green soul pills called mod souls. Sure, they may look like ordinary candy, but inside a stuffed doll or any other non-living or inanimate object, and they are very much alive. They may not be born human or created to look human, but they do act like humans. Orihime put her fingers to her lips, pondering her thoughts. She was never one for religion either. It's not that she didn't believe in God, she just never had the time or interest to pay it any mind. And besides, the only God, or if this entity is considered a god, is the Soul King. Although, she honestly doesn't know anything about the Soul King, only that he governs and balances the souls of the living and the dead to keep the world stable. And, she frowned, that Aizen was determined to destroy Karakura town, create the Okayan, and kill the Soul King. The ginger-haired girl sighed in defeat. This was all so confusing. Why was she even thinking about that stuff? Ichigo defeated Aizen. So, there's nothing to worry about, right? Yes, this religious stuff is really getting to her. Gray eyes peeked out to see the three other occupants staring at her, one with the look of curiosity, the other confused, and one mildly disappointed. What's a Soul King? The woman asked, hesitantly. Hey, Gray eyes widened. Ah, shoot. Was she thinking out loud? Is he a god of yours? She better think of something to defuse the situation she got herself in, and fast. Discussing Soul Reaper business is out of the question, remember? Crossing her arms, Orihime gave a look as if she was deep in thought. I guess, I only heard about it from other people. I didn't listen too much. I'm not religious, she answered. Her answer wasn't a total lie, so it was okay. Right? Not okay. When she saw gold eyes glaring at her suspiciously, the ginger-haired girl started sweating bullets. She's busted, her mind panicked. Need to think of something. A distraction. Any distraction. Orihime loudly let out a cheerful laugh, startling the three at her sudden outburst. Talking about science and religion sure is great, isn't it? Oh, boy. My head is spinning. She spun her head around so fast, it almost felt like her neck creaked. So when do we meet this Father Cornello? I'm dying to know his input. The woman blinked, surprised by the younger girl's sudden shift in tone. She heard the blonde one let out an exhausted sigh. Yes, this behavior was normal for her. Wait here. I'll tell father that you are interested in Letoism. It wasn't long before Orihime found herself walking a pathway to Father Cornello's chamber. The dark-skinned man leading them was named Cray. She also learned that the religious fanatic woman's name was Rose. Father Cornello is a very busy man, Cray informed them. But luckily, he decided to spare a moment for you three. He opened a huge, double door, leading them to a room that was more dimly lit than others. It made Orihime's neck hairs stand on ends, as something didn't feel right. The room. And the tone in the man's voice. The lack of sincerity in it. "Oh, thanks," Edward replied in an overly cheerful tone for a boy who was just mocking this religion moments ago. "No problem. We won't take too much of his time." "Excellent. We'll make this quick." Cray's voice seemed to drop a few octaves, becoming more menacing. Without warning, he pulled out a pistol and pointed at Alphonse while two guards were restraining Edward, blocking him with their spears, and another was holding Orihime hostage at gunpoint. Rose gasped in alarm and disbelief. "Brother Cray. What are you doing?" Exclamation mark. Quote. "Rose," he responded in a sickly sweet voice that was tainted with malice. "These heathens have come to discredit the Father. They are evil." Quote. The dark-haired woman seemed unwilling to believe him. "But this is God's will," he shouted, cutting her off. "Well, like you said, let's make this quick." Edward immediately elbowed one guard in the rib while flipping the other over, so he landed painfully on his back. Al punching the other pastor in the face, effectively knocking him out. "Hold it. Stop moving or I'll shoot the girl," the one holding Orihime hostage demanded. The threat caused both Ed and Al to freeze in their tracks. Seeing this, the auburn-haired began to feel bad. She felt like she was getting away, becoming a burden, like she always have. Well, not anymore. She deliberately took a clumsy step forward, accidentally, or not, stepping on the man's foot rather hard. He gave a painful, startled yelp, letting go of her. Once his guard was down, Ed dashed towards him, his fist connecting with his face, knocking him unconscious. "Nice work, Orihime." The girl gave a sheepish laugh in return. "What's all this commotion?" A sudden, low-pitched male's voice caught the foursome's attention. The man, who they had witnessed performing his miracles from earlier today, made his appearance, standing on the second-floor balcony of the room. Rose smiled, happily. "Father Cornello." Cornello glanced down at the four of them, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "I'm sorry about my followers. It seems like they were led astray from the path of God." Edward snorted, seeming unconvinced by the blatant lie. "Let's say I believe you weren't the person leading them astray, what now? Would you be interested in Letoism? You mean those cheap miracles?" Ed said, mockingly. "No thanks." Rose looked offended by the blonde's claim and seemed ready to defend Cornello. "Cheap miracles?" Cornello said, sounding insulted. He cuffed his hands together and there was small flash of red light. He created a small stone figurine of the sun god. "Can mere miracles create something out of nothing?" he asked. There was a hint of arrogance in his voice. In response, the blonde alchemist lazily scratched the side of his head. "Yeah, that's what I didn't get at first. How could you perform alchemy without a transmutation circle? Not only that, but you're defying the laws of equivalent exchange." I said, "It's not alchemy." Cornello yelled out, annoyed. Then it came to me, if you somehow came upon a stone that was said to increase one's alchemic powers, then that would explain everything. Golden eyes glared at the priest. "You have it, don't you? The philosopher's stone. It's your reign, isn't it?" The phony priest made a small noise, almost like he was inwardly scoffing at the notion. "A ring is just a ring. I am God's humble servant. It is from He alone that I derived my powers." Quote. Edward gave a malicious smirk, promising pain as he took threatening steps forward. If that's the way you play it, guess I'd have to come up there and beat the answers out of you. Cornello frowned. My, you certainly are an inexorable heathen, aren't you? The priest turned his eyes on the confused woman. Rose, dear, he called out to her in that sickening sweet voice of his. Why yes, father? Rose replied, her tone filled with uncertainty. Pick up that gun, would you? Yes. She reached down to pick up the pistol that was lying near her feet. Cornello's smile widened when he said this, as if silently praising a naive puppy. Good. Now, I want you to shoot the full Metal Alchemist, he instructed, evilly. Orihime immediately frowned at the malevolent request, and she also felt pity for the girl as she was having an internal breakdown. When he brought up the part about reviving the girl's apparently lost fiancé, the auburn-haired girl fist clenched at her side. She loathed people who manipulated others' feelings for selfish gain. It was despicable. The lowest of the low. This small hatred may come from her experiences as Aizen's hostage. Even so, it brought up too many painful memories. The ginger-haired girl took a deep breath, putting on her best, convincing, innocent facade as possible. I'm interested in Letoism, she suddenly announced, much to the shock of the other occupants in the room. Cornello raised a skeptical eyebrow. Really now? Orihime shook her head, enthusiastically, a wide smile spreading across her lips. Yes. And to prove it, I would like to destroy the full Metal Alchemist in Rose's place, if that would please you, father? Quote. The priest let out an evil, victorious smirk. It most certainly would, my dear. Orihime walked towards Rose, who was staring at the girl with fearful purple eyes. What are you doing, Orihime? Alphonse shouted out to her, obviously confused and hurt. She ignored him, tentatively taking the gun away from the shaking woman's hands. She silently cocked the gun and pointed it at Edward, much to the confusion of Rose and Cornello. Disregarding Al's protests, her gray eyes were met with Ed's golden ones, who was glaring at her with betrayal, hatred, and disgust. She inwardly flinched. Nobody has given her that kind of look before. Well, besides her enemies. It was painful to turn her gaze away. Though, she had to keep up this farce a little longer. You should have seen this coming, Edward, she said, evenly. The boy growled lowly in response. Oh, my God. She couldn't keep up this charade any longer. She sounded like such a terrible villain. Abruptly, Orihime burst into a jovial fit of laughter, much to the bewilderment of others, and they watched her double over, tears of mirth twinkling in the corner of her eyes as she mumbled something along the lines of, bad villain, should never act, in between giggles. She could help but to laugh. The thought of her being a villain was just too hilarious. Her laughter died down, as she slowly tried to catch her breath. She glanced up at the confused blonde, patting his shoulder. You should have seen this coming, Edward, she repeated once again, a soft smile forming on her lips as she tossed the gun in the farthest corner of the room. What? Exclamation mark. You tricked me, girl. Cornello all but screamed out, furiously. Orihime turned towards him and scowled. Be quiet. Her voice was so low and even, they seemed to lack emotion. But even though it sounded flat and toneless, it felt like hell was about to freeze over. The calm before the storm. I don't care about your miracles. I don't care about the philosopher's stone. I don't care about bringing the dead back to life. But what I won't stand for is manipulating another person's feelings." Gray eyes narrowed at the priest, giving him such an icy, disapproving glare. "Do you think it's okay to take pleasure in Rose's suffering? Exclamation mark. To take advantage of people's emotions? Exclamation mark. That's just awful. It's unforgivable. I'll never follow a man like you. Not in a million years." Quote. "Whoa, Orihime." Ed and Al stared at her in shock. They have never seen this side of her before. It was kind of scary and unnerving. Cornello growled in retaliation at the girl's outburst. Stupid girl. You made your choice. I'll see to it that you perish along with the full Metal Alchemist." He pulled down a switch to a lever. At the right of her peripheral vision, Orihime noticed a door opening, revealing an animal that looked like a hybrid between a lion and a lizard. If this was any other situation, the ginger-haired girl would have marveled at the sight of the half-lion, half-lizard animal. It was just so cool. However, she had to remember this was not the time to get sidetracked. This evil priest was trying to kill them, and he was using this lion-lizard creature to do it. But man, does it look incredible. She heard Edward sneer. "So this is the kind of thing you do with the Philosopher's Stone? That's just twisted." He sighed, clapping his hands together. "Anyway, looks like I'll need a weapon." He slammed his hands down, the usual alchemic spark surging through the ground. There was a small indentation as a long spear sprang forth. Ed skillfully twisted the spear in his hands, getting a firm grip. The lion charged at him, and as it sliced through Ed's spear effortlessly. However, a triangular shield prevented its claws from harming the alchemist. "Nice save, Orihime," he praised her, kicking the lion in the gut. It gave out a pained whine. "Damn, you evil heathens," Cornello growled out, transforming his staff into a machine gun. He fired at them, grinning maliciously. However, his grin turned into a displeased scowl when he saw a rock wall had blocked the bullets. "Let's get out of here, guys." The old priest smirked. "I have guards posted near the only exit in the room. Then I'll just make another one." Quote. Edward clapped his hands and slammed it on the wall, transforming part of the brick wall into a metal door. He slammed it open, Orihime and Alphonse following his lead, and a distraught Rose being carried in the armor's arms. They easily made it past the guards, knocking a few of them unconscious. The group came upon an empty room. There was a large desk with microphone sitting on it, a bookcase in the right side of the wall, and a large window on the wall behind the desk overlooking the city of Leor. Other than that, it was a really vacant room. "What's this room?" Edward asked, curiously. "This is where Father Cornellos does his sermons," Rose answered, unsurely, as if wondering if telling the three was the right thing to do. "Really now?" Ed's lips twisted in a mischievous smirk. Al sighed, resisting the urge to face Palm. Oh. He's thinking of doing something evil." Orihime watched as Alphonse hooked up a transmuted bell to a few wires, as Edward instructed them to make megaphone as he lured Cornello to his sermons room. Rose looked at them, disgusted. "Why are you so obsessed in destroying this sacred place? Can't you see Father Cornello has been granted divine gifts from the sun god, Leto? And he's sharing his gifts with us by performing miracles people could only dream about. Why do you want to ruin that? Why?" For a few moments, Orihime and Al didn't say anything. The ginger-haired girl didn't know what to say to the woman. She knows how desperately Rose wants to believe in Cornello, despite all evidence saying he's an evil, manipulative man. It's the kind of desperate desire one has when they become despairingly frantic because they are left with no other options than to cling on to that small, fragile hope of life. Like a thin cord barely holding one up from drowning in a freezing cold lake. "We just want the Philosopher's Stone, that's all," Alphonse finally replied. However, there was sense of loss and longing in his tone of voice. Rose's eyebrows furrowed in disapproval. "The Philosopher's Stone? You bring shame upon God's home for your own selfish gain? Can't you see that the Father would bring us happiness? That he'll bring my beloved back to life?" Orihime shook her head at the girl's delusions. She really did pity the poor woman. "I can understand your feelings, Rose," the ginger-haired girl said, slowly. "But have you ever thought about what your fiancé wants?" The woman's purple eyes widened in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Orihime walked over, leaning against the railing, staring at the city below, a wistful look in her eyes. "I don't know much about reviving the dead. But I think that's wrong. Reviving the dead? How are you even sure they want to return to the world of the living? People like to convince themselves that this is what their loved one wants. That they want to be with the loved ones they left behind. But how you can be sure they truly want that? Mixing their feelings for your own." She shook her head, soberly. "That's not love. It's called being selfish." Orihime could sworn she heard Alphonse give a small pained and shocked gasp, but she paid it no mind. For now. Rose's face contorted into an angry glare. Be quiet. You have no idea what you're talking about." She was shaking from rage, but also from the crushing realization that girl before her might be right. She spoke with such humble sincerity, it was almost impossible not to believe her. "What's wrong with bringing someone I love back from the dead?" Quote. The auburn-haired girl tilted her head, offering the offended woman a soft smile. "But he's not dead. He still lives inside you." Dark brows furrowed in confusion. "Have you ever thought about what gets left behind after a person passes on from this world? Sure, their bodies are gone as well as their souls. But there is one thing that remains here for all eternity. What is it then?" Rose demanded. The hopelessness and despair in her voice was heartbreaking to hear. "Their feelings," Orihime said, simply. Those two simple words held so much devotion, certainty, and passionately convincing. Her face softened into a blissful expression. "That's all you really need. You just need that connection of feelings, of your hearts becoming one and the same. The people you love might be gone, but the feelings they left behind would always be inside your heart. I think that connection is greater than any force in the universe." She raised her hand in the air, almost like she was trying to reach for something that only she could see. "As long as your feelings are connected, you are never alone, you are never forgotten, and you are never abandoned. Your feelings would last for an eternity. That's the one thing that'll never die, that simple, heartfelt, everlasting connection." Rose was stared in the girl in awe, tears streaming down her face. No one had ever said something so encouraging and heartwarming before. The way the girl, it was almost as if she knew exactly what she was talking about, exactly what Rose was feeling. That passion and that empathy, the woman wanted to believe what she was saying is true. But Father Cornello promised to bring her fiancé back to life. What should she do? What should she believe in? Meanwhile, Al was staring at Orihime in a new light. He was completely memorized by her speech. Of course, if it were Ed, he would probably pass it off as sappy nonsense, being the type that wants logic and reasons and facts. But Alphonse was different. He was completely at awe at Orihime's impassioned monologue. It was such a beautiful speech. He wondered if their mother's feelings still lives inside him and his brother, or if Ed's and his feelings are connected. Although, he'll never ask Ed that. He'll just make fun of him. But still, wow, Orihime. Just then Edward's voice came on the intercom, gradually exposing Cornello for the fraud he is. So? What happened to the Philosopher's Stone? Alphonse asked his brother as the three of them left the church, their mission completed. It was a damn fake, Edward responded, giving a disappointed sigh. And here I thought we could return everything to normal. Give me the Philosopher's Stone. A familiar voice stopped them. The three teens turned to see a distraught Rose pointing a shaking gun at them. Like I said before, it was a fake, Ed explained. Liar! She exclaimed, the despair seeping through her voice. You just want to keep it for yourself. Orihime shook her hand. That's not true, Rose. We just need it for something important. She honestly never knew why the boys were so desperately searching for this stone. Although, she wasn't one to pry into their private lives either. And I have something important to me as well. Rose retreated, tears of remorse pouring down the woman's face. The ginger-haired girl really felt sorry for the poor woman. She tentatively took a steady step forward, fully aware the Elric brothers were watching. She knew they wanted to leave this city as soon as possible, seeing as there's no longer any reason to stay here. But she could not just leave Rose like this without knowing if she'd recover from this ordeal. The auburn-haired girl steadily placed a hand on the woman's own shaking one, her gray eyes piercing through the dark-haired woman's own purple ones. I know, Rose. I know, Orihime spoke, slowly, trying to not to offend the woman enough for her to pull the trigger. But you are not alone. You still have a whole city of people who love you. And besides, there's still a tomorrow. Smile, move forward, and reach for it. She carefully pried the woman's fingers from the gun, one by one. Today might be terrible, but tomorrow would be better. She freed the gun from Rose's hand, staring at the tearful woman with a soft, genuine smile. The secret to happiness is always wearing a wonderful, radiant smile. That's how you make everyone happy. And the people of Leor are going to need you, Rose, to bring them that happiness. It's your turn to start the seeds of life, so that it could blossom into a beautiful flowers. That's what you could do. Orihime didn't say anything more and walked away, leaving the dazed woman with her thoughts. She didn't want to waste any more time of the brothers. Did you really mean that? The ginger-haired girl tilted her head towards the suit of armor as they reached the bottom step, the sun drifting away towards the horizon, creating a vibrant yellow glow. She raised a questionable eyebrow. Which part does he mean? She meant all of it, but she wanted him to elaborate. About people who want to bring the dead back to life are selfish? Al asked, hesitantly with a slightly hurt-filled tone. Hearing the question, Edward turned to glare at the girl, ready to chew her out to defend his brother. Yes, Orihime's voice cut him off, but it didn't lift the anger he was starting to feel. I think anyone who deliberately disrupts the balance in the world are selfish, She was going off on how it's a soul reaper's duty to keep souls between the soul society and the world of the living at a constant flow. Any disturbances in the flow would destroy both worlds. The Elric brothers remained silent. Edward was gritting his teeth, trying to keep himself from snapping at the girl. He could tell she wasn't trying to sound disdainful. But still, what she was saying brought up painful memories. Do you have someone like that? Someone you want to keep close to you? Alphonse asked, silently, hesitantly, his voice coming in a quiet, noiseless, dispirited whisper. The question almost startled the auburn-haired girl as a small blush was adorning her face. Good thing most of her face was hidden by her hair. How embarrassing. Yes, she finally responded silently. Ichigo, she inwardly thought, her heart racing just a beat. The boys stared at the girl in wonder, reflecting on the subject at hand. They didn't have a complete understanding of what to make the girl's small speech, but they did come to a silent agreement. They should never tell Orihime they tried to transmute their mother.
Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. Apologies for all those quotes, exclamation marks, question marks and mispronunciations. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night. See you next time, my dear faves.